How do you decide which elements to leave in and take out of your script? You really it's a cliche, but you just leave in the best bits and you take out the other bits. Anything that doesn't serve the story, you just need to get rid of. That could be characters, that could be plot, that could be scenes, that could be settings. The hardest part is when you have a scene you really, really love or a character you really, really love, and you know that they're just not helping the story. They're not moving along the plots. They're not really helping with anything. They're just this little funny thing that you have because you have some kind of personal connection to something and you really just kind of want it in the script. If it's not helping the story, it just needs to go. Because unlike previous centuries where there are plenty of books out there where the writers were paid by the word. And that's when you get sometimes very good books, but they're just bloated because the writer knows they're being paid by the word. That's not the world that we're in now. It's the exact opposite now. Is you have limited time, people have limited attention spans, limited time to give to stuff. If you're filling up story with all the stuff that doesn't go anywhere, you're just going to frustrate people and they're not going to listen. So it has to advance the story, it has to advance the plot, it has to be something interesting that the characters are getting into, some interesting information that, you're learning about them, about the story, about, the set, any of that stuff. If it's helping the story, keep it in. If it's just this funny thing that you're trying to throw in, it's unless it becomes important later on, you kind of have to get rid of it. Yeah. That's sort of my non-answer. There you go. What project management tools do you use? I use a few of them, but I would say Asana is probably my favorite. I was first introduced to it, yeah, I would at least 6, 7 years ago. Like it's been quite some time. And it wasn't until it was a big comic book project I started working on at least 4 or 5 years ago. It wasn't until then that I really like jumped into it hardcore. And that's because I was directing it, I was producing it, and I was the head writer on it. And I knew that I was going to have, the co-producer and I were working on stuff. I knew we were going to have a bunch of different artists, which was the biggest issue, was that was going to have a bunch of different people creating, creating characters, doing sketches, helping with the art Bible, and then actually working on the project itself. And then eventually I was going to have inkers and I was going to have colorers, and there was going to be a couple of, different writers that would come in and help with stuff. And then using all of that stuff, especially background stuff, and making social media content. And it quickly became obvious that the project was getting big and that I was really going to need to be able to have a good handle on all of the people that were helping. And that just seemed like the easiest way to go, because the thing, and I'm in no way affiliated with Asana, like no way at all. But being able to set stuff up on schedules and have due dates, and specifically being able to set stuff in order. Is one person writes something, one person does the initial sketch, another person maybe finalizes it, then the next person needs to ink something, and then it goes to the colorer, and then it goes on, et cetera, et cetera. When one person's task is dependent on the person prior to them finishing their task first, that's what Asana is the best for. Is once that person is done, you can set it up that it can then send the information to the next person. So you are not manually going through every single time something is finished and trying to set it on to the next person. You could just set all that stuff up. So when stuff is going out in sequences, it's just automatically being sent to the right person. And then again, the due dates, setting the due dates, following the due dates, changing the due dates. It's really easy to see when something was due 3 days ago and it's not done. It's literally bright red on the screen. So like you don't even have to go searching for it. You can just tell that, something was missed, and it's easy to find it, tag that person, send them a note, whatever it is that you need to inform them. Oh, hey, I need to make sure that this gets done. So for me, and that was a comic book, but I use that for my film projects. I use that for a lot of the workshops I work on, and panels and social media content and podcasts, everything. Like I use Asana for absolutely everything. So yeah, that is very much my recommendation. How did you get into multicam directing? I did theater directing as my undergrad, so my first advanced degree I got was literally in directing, and while I was at theater school is when I started working on some short films. I think I was the assistant director on the first short film I ever worked on, and it was oh, what was it? It must have been a 16 millimeter. I'm trying to think what it was. It had to have been 16 millimeter short film that we did actually on film, wasn't digital, and it was a lot of fun, and I thought, "Wow, this is kind of exciting to get into this." And I always because I had such a heavy theater background, I always look at film and video as a version of theater, which I think most people probably don't. But I know that on most films that like for television, you've got single camera shows and you have multi-camera shows. Generally speaking, a lot of the multi-camera shows are done quicker because you've got multiple cameras up. So the sets aren't as complicated, the lights aren't as complicated. You do them almost more like plays because you're filming multiple things at the same time. And then for anything that's like, I don't want to say higher quality because that's not quite where I'm going with that. But for anything that's single camera, it's a single setup. So all the lighting has changed, the scenery has changed. This like it takes much longer, and so they have a very different look to them. Single cam versus multicam in the television worlds. But because I come from theater, I like being able to capture what's going on from multiple angles at the same time. So even when I'm doing short films, like any moments where I can do 2 cameras, I like setting it up as if it's a single camera, shoot, but I like having 2, occasionally even 3 cameras when I can, because it makes it easier in the edits when you're not trying to match when one person is holding something in their right hand and then the second time they did it, they were holding it in their left hand and, the script supervisor didn't realize the mistake and the actor didn't realize the mistake. So I really like the ability to be able to film multiple different angles at the same time. I think it just makes it's a little bit more prep work you have to do, but it makes it a little bit easier in the edits. And so that sort of thinking translated to when I came to Atlanta and I started working on a lot more comedy stuff, whether it's stand up, improv, different kind of variety shows. Being able to do multicam is just so much easier because you've got all the different things to choose from. You have your screen set up. I use ATEM equipment, so I can have as many as 8 cameras plugged in at the same time, or 6 cameras in 2 different computers if we're doing slides, we're playing videos or anything like that. So lots of cameras and just being able to see everything at the same time, calling cues, talking to the camera operators, giving them directions, talking to the person who's sitting actually at the stream deck, who's switching back and forth between all the different views. Like that came very naturally to me. And also just working on interviews, especially these last like 10, 15 years. Anytime I'm doing an interview, always want at least 2 cameras. I would prefer 3, sometimes even 4. So just knowing what are the best angles, what's the best lighting, what's the, just you want the person that you're interviewing to look great. You want them to look like they know what they're talking about. You want it to be, professional setting. You really want them to be able to shine in the interview. So having multiple cameras and being able to switch back and forth between the different views, I think just makes everything look better. So how did I get into it? Theater, interviews, comedy. I just sort of did it without a little bit of going onto YouTube to kind of just get a little bit of an idea, especially as far as like calling cues, making sure that I was talking to the camera operators correctly. But really, I just started doing it. I was like, yeah, I could do it, and I just sort of did it. Like I didn't let myself get too caught up in the details of it. I was like, "Yep, I can do it. I've got a lot of directing experience. I do a lot of camera operating. I do a lot of photography. I know what I'm doing. I just need to learn how to do all these things at the same time," and I just jumped into it. I just seemed it seemed the best way to go.